Hello everybody. Hello and welcome. Hello. Welcome to the Social Work, Fundraising, and Philanthropy panel. Thank you all for joining us. We are so excited to have this panel tonight. I'm just admitting some people as we go along. All right. Okay, so to get started, hi, my name is Chloe Jaclyn Rothbloom, and I am one of the MSW interns for the Silver Office of Development. I will be co-moderating the event tonight with my co-intern Sergio Torres. But before we get started, I have a few introductory items to go over. So first of all, the layout for the session, our time together this evening, and what that's going to look like. We've got 4 amazing panelists with us tonight, all of whom are alumni of the Silver School of Social Work. They all earned their MSW, and one also earned their BSW here, and have worked with fundraising or philanthropy in their careers after graduating from Silver. We have some prepared questions for them for the bulk of our event tonight, and then later on towards the end, we're going to be opening up for a question and answer session with audience members. So if you have any questions, you'll have a chance to ask those at the end. At that point, we'll let you know when that happens, so you can raise your hand and unmute, or you can also, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat message as well. Our team will be monitoring them, and so if we see any questions in the chat, we'll save them for the Q&A at the end. A couple of Zoom specific items. There are the options with Zoom at the top right corner. You may see you can choose between either speaker view or gallery view. This is a choose your own adventure. Feel free to choose whichever you like. If you choose gallery view, you'll be able to see everyone at the same time, all of our panelists and also attendees. And if you choose the speaker view, then it should feature only the person who's speaking at that moment. So right now it would be myself who's being featured for your screen if you are in speaker view. Because of that, we do ask that all of the attendees, except for our panelists, keep yourselves on mute while the panelists are talking. And that's so that there's no background noise that might come in, because if someone is using the speaker view, then Zoom will automatically feature background noise over the individuals who are speaking. So we ask that you stay on mute until the Q&A portion. Feel free to engage in the chat if something comes up and you'd like to share a comment or ask a question. Like I said, we'll be monitoring that and saving questions for the end as well. And you might notice we've enabled live transcript. So that's another customization item that Zoom has. If you see it, it might by default should be showing up at the bottom of your screen. But if you prefer, you should be able to click and drag it and move that to any part of your screen that you like. And lastly, you should have also received a notification via Zoom that we are recording this session. And we do hope to be able to make that available later for folks who weren't able to attend tonight's session and join us, so that they're able to view the content later asynchronously. And that covers all of the Zoom related items. So with that, let's get started. I will pass over to Sergio to introduce the panel. I'll just unmute Sergio.
Oh, my apologies. So first of all, thanks, Chloe, for that. And in terms of our Silver Development Office, in case you're not aware, or if you don't know as much about it, they're led by Laura Turner and Laura Meyer. They're on this event right now. You can see them waving. And the office is responsible for cultivating relationships with individuals, including alums and organizations that result in monetary gifts or donations. And those funds, they go towards the scholarships, the grants, and emergency relief, among other things, right? And they help develop the newly launched Moving Forward Fund. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but this fund is a campaign dedicated to reducing the total educational costs for Silver students. And since the summer of 2020, they started a field placement where Chloe Rothbloom and myself have had the pleasure to do some amazing work, macro work, around what it means to actually operate in the field of fundraising and philanthropy. So with that said, we've also done a school-wide needs assessment over the past year due to COVID-19. That's went out to the whole student body just to see what are some of the challenges they're going through. So that has led to some very valuable data. Some of the work that, on top of that, we've also partnered with the Office of Global and Lifelong Learning, and we've created a Silver Alumni Support Group. And this is where we give alumni, recent alumni, the space to network, to be able to engage in mutual aid, and walk away with resources that will help them as they can transition into their new careers. So with that said, finally, as a result of all this work, we've been able to put together this panel, right? So, we want everybody to be able to sit back and enjoy everything that our panelists have to say around fundraising and philanthropy. And thank you so much for coming. With that said, I'm going to start introducing our amazing panelists. We have 4 panelists. Here we have Philip Bien. He's a LCSW. And he is the Director of Institutional Advancement at the Town School. And he earned his BSW here at Silver on 2003 and his MSW in 2004. We have Kelli Lewis, and she's the Director of Corporate Giving at Macy's. So you also get the corporate side of philanthropy. And she earned her MSW on 2012. We also have Kelsey Louie. He earned his MSW here at Silver at 2001, and he's the Chief Executive Officer of Gay Men's Health Crisis, and he's also an adjunct assistant professor here. And then we have Pia Raymond. She's the founder of Creating Legacies, and she's also an adjunct lecturer here, and she earned her MSW in 2002. So with that being said, we will move on to the panel, the moderated questions. So with that being said, I only did a brief introduction of all the panelists because I want them to be able to tell you who they are and where they come from and what their journeys are. So I would love for the panelists, we can start off with Philip, to tell us about your professional journey. How did you come to this work, in the role that you're operating in after graduating from Silver?
Thanks so much. It's so nice to be here, and I'm so fond of my time at NYU, particularly the BSW program. And it's not lost on me that the first person I met was Dr. Rosenfeld, my very first meeting at NYU, and I'm so thrilled that you're here. It's so good to see you, Dr. Rosenfeld. So let me just get to it. I grew up in New York City, and I've always been interested and curious about the wealth distribution in the city. It's remarkable, and it's hard to walk down a street without seeing the disparity. And so I've always been curious about that as a child growing up in the city, and that's what brought me into social work. And then I was really, I went to NYU. I got my BSW and then the MSW, and I was like, I don't know, 23 or 24 years old. I was very young, and I didn't particularly feel like I was ready to start giving out clinical guidance or, really being there as such a young person. I didn't have that much life experience behind me. And so I started working at the American Montessori Society. I was always interested in education, improving schools, knowing that the kids are the future in every way, and thinking about how can we help teachers develop professionally and also improve schools in general. And I spent a few years there, and as I got older, I got a little more confident and figured, okay, I can start working in a school now, and did that. But one of the things that, I'll give you an example. When I was the dean of a school, I worked, and the head of school charged me with creating affinity groups for the school. So the middle schoolers would have a place to go, young people of color, young women, LGBTQ plus students, Gender and Sexuality Alliance, things like that. And I was really excited about the idea, but I couldn't just turn to teachers who were overworked and say, hey, could you add this to your schedule? And then I realized that, middle school students really need a little extra boost to join a group like that. And so for middle school, that means usually like pizza and some art supplies. So, all of those things like teacher time and counselor time and pizza is actually not inexpensive when you start adding it up. So I realized that I needed to find the money for all this. And then that's what really brought me to understanding that our programs are critically tied to the funding that we get, and that if I focus on raising money and helping folks invest in our programs, that the impact that I would have was far greater on many more people than just working individually with folks. And that's how I drifted in that direction.
Thank you so much, Phil. Thanks for sharing that. And next, we're going to have Kelli Lewis.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here. So my story is also an interesting one. So when I was getting my MSW, I pursued, I wanted to pursue a clinical path. I thought I wanted to go down the route of therapy. And so my field placements were at a mental health clinic, and it was exactly what I thought I wanted to do. And I quickly realized that I had a hard time separating myself from the work. I have such enormous respect for those who can do it. I just struggled with it. And I found that a lot of my peers in my program at the time, they felt really excited about their field placements, and they knew that the path that they wanted to pursue. And I was a little bit lost. I know that, I knew that I went to get my MSW because I wanted purpose-driven work. I wanted to feel as though what I was doing every day mattered, and that I could help make a difference in some way. And so I just honestly didn't, this is why I'm thrilled about this panel, because I would have personally loved something like this at this time, especially in my second year. And so I honestly just started to do a bunch of research to figure out like, what are other paths or careers that I can pursue and still use my degree. And I ended up finding a volunteer opportunity at Sanctuary for Families, which is a domestic violence prevention shelter downtown New York. And I volunteered with them. I helped put on their gala that year and got really the first time exposure into a development office and realized that I loved it. I think the thing that was really missing for me personally was I really loved being part of a team. I loved feeling as if I could work together and make that impact as opposed to working by myself, similar to what Philip was saying as well. And so got that exposure to Sanctuary. And then I ended up pursuing a job at Cystic Fibrosis Foundation in development. And then ultimately went to Memorial Sloan Kettering, where I was for 5 years. And was able to help oversee their peer-to-peer fundraising platform and worked very closely with donors, survivors, families of survivors, or those who had or patients or who had lost family members to cancer. So it was very much pulling on my social work degree in terms of how to handle very sensitive situations, but found the work to be incredibly fulfilling. And after my time, or towards the end of my time at MSK, and I started thinking about my next step and taking all of my experience from social work in terms of working with nonprofits from a clinical perspective, from a program perspective, and then from a fundraising perspective, wanted to translate that work to the corporate side. Because I really believed and have found that it's true that in order to effectively determine how to give out money, you should really understand how nonprofits function, which nonprofits can really effectively quantify the impact of funding, which would be good partners, and which would help tell the story that the corporation is trying to tell. So I was able to get a job at Macy's overseeing their corporate giving team. And I've been with Macy's now for 2.5 years. And I'm sure I'll have time to dive into a little bit more about what my day-to-day is, but I oversee our grant making essentially, and we facilitate grants all around the country and all communities where we have stores, and oversee their matching gift program as well. So definitely have drawn on all of my experience working in nonprofits, my social work experience as well, to the role that I am at today.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelli. Thank you. And next we have Kelsey Louie. Floor is yours.
Everybody, I am so happy to be here, especially with this distinguished group of panelists. And thank you to Sergio, Chloe, Laura, and Laura. I love that interns really led this process. I started my career, like many of you, wanting to be a social worker and wanting to be a clinician. I started as a child's therapist because I knew I wanted to work with children. And then I spent a good amount of time as the director of substance use prevention services and because I knew I wanted to work with substance users. And then I knew I wanted to work in HIV/AIDS and LGBT issues, so I got a quick job at GMHC and then left because I didn't like it. And then I got a job at Harlem, and then I got a job in child welfare because I missed working with kids. And then I was recruited to Harlem United in the HIV/AIDS services space. And the reason why I go back and forth between that, because our careers as social workers can take many forms, and you can make many pivots. And so I'm not sure how where everybody is in their careers, but please know that you can use your skills as transferable skills and kind of change your mind as often as I did. And so the early part of my career has been focused on programs, and that's what I wanted to do, to have an impact on individual lives and then in programs. And I worked really hard while I was I worked hard all the time, but I worked extra hard while I was at Harlem United, got promoted several times, and left there as a chief operating officer. And up till that point, all I did was manage programs and administrative areas and did very little fundraising. The one area of fundraising that I did do leveraged my expertise in programs, which was grant writing. And that is a form of fundraising. And like many of my other transitions, I use the transferable skills of grant writing, talking about programs, what we learned in research too, if you remember, program evaluation, and use that to talk about outcomes when we talk about our programs, and got a job as the CEO of GMHC. Who knew that I could do that, right? And so, sorry, I'm a new dad, so I'm trying to manage this little guy. As the CEO of GMHC, my primary function is fundraising. And you haven't heard me say anything about fundraising to this point except grant writing, but I was able to use those skills, the skills of convincing a government entity or a large foundation to provide a portion of their dollars to the programs that I ran, is a very similar skill. In fact, the same exact skill as convincing a very wealthy person or a not so wealthy person to give part of their income to an organization like GMHC. And that's what I wanted to share with everybody, is that you may not have started your career in fundraising, but it can be an easy transition if that's what you're interested in doing. I did it. Thanks.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Kelsey. And then last but not least, we have Pia. The floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me. It's wonderful to be here this evening. So my name is Pia Raymond. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I started the social work journey knowing that I wanted to be deeply involved in community. At the time, really focused on working with youth and adolescents. But then as I came out of Silver, it was clear that there were so many opportunities to serve community. And similar to what you're saying, Kelsey, I wanted to do a little bit of all of it. So I jumped in the beginning in preventive services, and then went into New York City Mission Society, where I did work with adolescents, specifically immigrant youth from all around the world who are language learners. But one of the things that stuck out also was the fundraising, and being able to have opportunities for the teens to have dynamic programming in the midst of the public school that they were serving in. It was clear that the organization, while it was, I think 100 years old at that time, still had some fundraising efforts that they were doing that didn't necessarily involve the clients and the students that we were working with. And I sort of raised to administration that it would be a wonderful thing to have some of the young people involved and connect with the donors, and just bringing life to the actual mission that we were working with, and have people connect with people as we do as social workers. So I think my first introduction to that was on one of the big fundraising efforts that they do in the spring, was organizing the students to create a video and then bringing them to that event and introducing them to folks. I met the late David Dinkins and Cicely Tyson, who were together at that event, actually. I'll never forget, in the context of this year especially. And then just being enlivened by that, and recognizing sometimes there's a real divide between the donors of an organization and what's actually happening for us as social workers at the ground floor, and recognizing that's an important bridge to gap for us as social workers, and being mindful of how we do that in different spaces. So fast forward, I started my own organization called Creating Legacies, which is a nonprofit organization geared to bringing families fun and bringing families together. So expanding the family network within each other's system while meeting other families in community and utilizing the many cultural institutions and attractions, especially here in Brooklyn. And with that, it became quickly evident that while my heart was big and the vision was big, if we don't have money to sort of support the programs, then we don't have a program. So really started reaching out grassroots to local businesses for in-kind donations and the use of their spaces. And that grew so much. And again, I feel comfortable connecting directly with people. So writing some grants, Citizens Committee for New York City is a great resource for anyone looking for grants for small programs. So that was sort of the baseline of growing that organization. And then my working community continued to expand through the social work sector and nonprofit to really recognizing that macro social work that we talk about and the necessity for policy implementation and change in our communities. And I ran for New York City Council in the last election cycle, actually, which was 2017. And that was where I was thrust full force into fundraising. I was not necessarily comfortable at that level where I was directly asking for donations on a daily basis. And so that sort of got me over the discomfort with asking for money, but really, again, being authentic and sincere in my drive and supportive community and bringing people together and really voicing their change and amplifying their voices in what's needed. And in doing so, was able to raise, was one of the biggest fundraisers in that campaign election cycle, despite being my absolute first time running for public office, not initially having the funds to hire a fundraiser and actually doing it all myself. So that was the piece that really sort of brought me fully into that fundraising realm, and that I learned the most and had the most diverse experience, both connecting with people around donations, making phone calls, and then bringing event planning skills and just the fun that I would feel and bringing people together in creative ways while spotlighting small businesses in the process. So hosting a myriad of events that spoke also to the mission of the work that I was doing, bringing families together, highlighting local businesses, highlighting other nonprofit organizations that were doing great work, and fundraising in the midst of all of it.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
So with our first question of the night, with keeping this event was created because we thought that it was important for social workers to have some education about philanthropy and fundraising. But even with that being the scope of the event, we wanted to ask our panelists, do you think it's important for social workers to learn about philanthropy and fundraising as part of their social work education? Some of you already touched on this in your introductions, but to go a little deeper, why or why not?
I can start. To me, I think it's important to know kind of the wide scope of opportunities that you can explore. So with your degree, CSR, corporate social responsibility in general, is obviously a newer career option over the last 10, 15, 20 years. I didn't even know, quite honestly, when I graduated college, that CSR was a path that I could explore, which is ultimately where I am now. So from the corporate standpoint, I think it would definitely be interesting to be able to learn and incorporate that into coursework or programming, if possible, about what is CSR, how are companies responding to social impact, sustainability, diversity and inclusion, and how social workers can ultimately pursue career options in this space. And just learning a little bit more about what CSR entails, I think can definitely be incredibly valuable.
I agree with everything that Kelly said. I would also add that I think social workers can do everything better than anyone else. And fundraising is one of those things. The cornerstone of good fundraising is quality programming. And who knows how to run quality programming, and who knows better how to tell a story about the impact of our programs than social workers. So absolutely, I think it should be part of a social worker's education so that they also can have options. And also, I think Philip said it earlier, kind of, it's important for people to understand the whole process in terms of why we're raising money, and kind of understanding kind of both ends. And I think understanding both sides can actually also help a social worker as they're working in programs, being able to develop the language to speak about the work that they do, focused on outcomes and impact in a way that can either help the fundraising team or do it themselves.
I'm going to also add on, just Kelsey made me think of something. In terms of the fundraising perspective too, I would certainly get questions, are you drawing on your MSW at all? Or, and when I was at Sloan Kettering, and, what does this have to do with what you studied for? And I'll never forget, as part of my job, sadly, was my team and we were often the first point of contact for someone who lost a loved one to cancer to provide obituary language. And those conversations were some of the hardest I've ever had, calling a wife who lost, on the way to her husband's funeral to, where MSK is one of the first contacts that they made because they wanted to figure out how they could make donations in their loved one names back to the hospital. And so to be able to have the skills to have that type of conversation, I drew on my social work degree all the time. And there's certainly many more examples of that. So again, it's kind of, you never really realize how often the tools that you've learned will help you in this, whether it's fundraising or CSR. And I agree that social workers, we can certainly do anything and have the tools to be able to pursue various different types of work and have sensitive conversations or be able to thoughtfully ask for money. And that's definitely incredibly relevant to the skills that we've learned.
I definitely see with my students, actually, sometimes there's great frustration around programmatic efforts that are not available in agencies that they're serving, or resources that are not available to clients, especially in this season right now of COVID and racial reckoning, and how it specifically has affected marginalized communities of color and immigrant communities disproportionately. So it becomes more and more evident that fundraising is critical to our scope as social workers and how we're able to support the larger organizations with those fundraising efforts. And again, being the bridge between the work that we're doing with the clients or with the populations that we're serving and the donors of the organization or the board of directors of the organization. So sharing with students currently about the importance of not being completely isolated as the social worker, but how do you make these connections, especially if you're thinking about areas of policy change or even the way existing policy in organizations is carried out. Much of that can be impacted with when those who are funding the organization are really in touch with what the work's looking like to us every day and how that shifts and change so that they can evolve in that process and really understand what's happening.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And actually, some of what Kelly mentioned ties into the next question. We wanted to, ask, and when I spoke with you, Kelly, you spoke on this and you mentioned it just now. In fundraising involving a combination between micro and macro work. And although you spoke on it, I just wanted to know, just give this a shot and see, is there anything else that you can say about how you can use these skills and how it combines these two worlds as you do your work?
Sure, yeah. So for me, social work, the path that I was pursuing when I was at Silver felt very micro, working one-on-one with, essentially as a clinician, and having kind of that one-on-one relationship. And so when I made the transition into fundraising, I really thought about how can I make a difference, but at a larger scale. That, as I said previously, I had a harder time separating myself from the work. And so the micro level just felt too intimate for me, or intense maybe is the word. And so thinking about how can I take my skills and pursue more work making a difference at the macro level. And that's really, again, what I look at in terms of fundraising or CSR, is not intimately assisting one client or one person, but being able to support a larger movement or a larger organization or a larger cause.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wants to share about perhaps how micro and macro combine in your work?
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Philip, go ahead.
Oh, sure. I was just going to say, I was trained as a really, really good listener, and a really, I like to think I'm good at building relationships with folks. And, if I had to quantify how much time I actually ask people for money, it's probably less than 1% of my day-to-day. But so much of my work is really building the relationship and listening really carefully to a potential donor. So if there's someone who's potentially going to make a big gift, I really want to listen to, like, what are they interested in funding? What is their motivation? How would they like to be asked for money? And how much are they thinking? And to really think those things through, to have conversations with them, to be really skilled in listening for those little hints that they provide, to show us the way. I mean, that's very micro, but we can get some pretty macro gifts from that method, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I would add, I think there are a number of social work skills that translate directly to fundraising. So, I mean, as Philip was mentioning, kind of the first step is kind of researching, right? Understanding what needs to be funded and who there is to potentially fund your programs or organization. And so that's whether it's on a large scale, like a needs assessment, or what you might do when you take on a new case, where you look at a client's history. What have they given to in the past? How much? When? What time of year? Then you need to develop a strategy around how to, just put it bluntly, get money from that person. And that's kind of, that would relate to, analyzing a situation, the current situation with the client, and developing a treatment plan. And then next, as Philip said, the largest part of fundraising, the fundraising cycle, is cultivation. And that's where social work skills really come in handy. Your interpersonal skills, your rapport building skills, building alliances, and finally, making the business case as to why someone should donate to your organization, your program, or why a company or a foundation should give to your organization. That's, again, kind of evaluation and really focusing on outcomes. So all of the fundraising skills that you need to be successful can be really developed based on the foundational social work skills that we all have.
Thank you for that. That's actually something that Sergio and I learned really early on in our internship. One of the first things that we worked on with Laura and Laura was developing stewardship strategies with donors for NYU. Moving on to our next question, and this is something that came up that comes up in conversations for me a lot when I tell people that I'm an intern for the development office and I talk about fundraising and philanthropy. The word philanthropy is often associated with very wealthy individuals, the people that are donating large sums of money. So to our panelists, do you think that's true, that philanthropy is mostly for wealthy individuals? And do you have any thoughts on the word philanthropy, or how this field is perceived versus how it's actually actualized?
I think when we met, Chloe, we had an opportunity to talk a little bit about it, but I had shared that I feel like philanthropy, the word, the concept, the connotation can be off-putting to people, especially we as social workers doing direct work in communities, and recognizing that English is not always people's first language. And so just the word itself may be difficult for people to pronounce or understand, so they may not even know what we're referring to. And then even as I mentioned, in many of our organizations, the larger organizations, there's such a separation between the clients and all the layers in between till you get to the donors, especially the corporate donors and the boards of directors. So being the bridge between that space helps to sort of navigate even the word philanthropy, explaining it the ground floor. And we as social workers can sometimes take that role, which it sounds like some of us have stepped into that role, not necessarily thinking that's what we wanted to do, recognizing how do I make this connection between the work that we're doing and the funding. So if that is organizing clients maybe to have smaller fundraising efforts, that they're having an event that speaks to what they're doing in the organization, or celebrating them through some sort of a graduation exercise, or presenting their narratives as a group, for example, is a way that they can get involved and feel connected. Larger donors can see that activity that's happening and understand the depth and breadth of the work in a different way, and everyone can feel connected. So I feel like the word philanthropy is off-putting, and the more that we can just make it come alive for both the clients, the donors, and everyone in between, and have layers to that fundraising, the more connected the program will be. And often we can affect change on the macro levels, because we will be able to help shift the cultures of the organizations as our circumstances evolve.
I like to think of, each of the organizations we work with are communities, and it's so important that we have a sense of every member of that community feeling like they have a sense of agency and ownership. And so when I talk about philanthropy, and I talk about it with everybody, it's so important that we think about it in three ways. People are able to give through either their time, through volunteering, through their talent, or their expertise that they've learned along their life, or treasure, which are sort of the cash gifts that we're talking about. And it's so important that we make sure that everybody in the organization is on board with it. And like Professor Raymond said, we want everyone to see the activity that people are invested, and that we can say to a potential donor that their gifts will make a big impact and be a big investment in our communities.
All right,
What
fantastic.
they both said.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm sorry for talking over you. No, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying that I have nothing to add, because Pia and Philip really answered the question really well.
Fantastic, fantastic. All right, great. So for the interest of time, we're gonna just skip ahead. We just want to get into one of the questions that we would love to hear all of you elaborate on. So what is one piece of practical advice or a best resource you would give to students who are interested in starting a career in philanthropy or fundraising? Whoever wants to start, just go for it.
I can start. I would say understand that your skills are transferable, and if you're not in, if you don't have a role in fundraising now, talk to your fundraising department and ask how you can help. They will have 100 things that you can do, and that can get you started. And you can kind of dab your toe in it. And if you don't like it, then okay. But if you're interested, ask them. They would love to hear a client story. They would love to get some ideas, or to learn more about the programs, or to figure out what you need. So that would be a good place to start.
I definitely think it's important to, to Kelsey's point, getting that experience or understanding, opportunities for you to be able to just even observe what happens in a development office, or, volunteer at an organization, just to kind of see behind the scenes. And I think the biggest thing for me, especially when I made the move from the fundraising side to the giving side, was having my story, knowing what my story was, because sometimes when I would go in for an interview, it wasn't this kind of direct line of, why is Kelly sitting here and why is she the best for the job? And so for me, it was really understanding what my story is, and honestly talking through a lot of what we've just talked about. drawing on my experience from social work and drawing on my experience from fundraising and all of the nonprofit experience, and why I'm best suited for this position is because I bring such a unique view that I imagine many of their other candidates did not. And so exactly as Kelsey was saying is that, the experiences that we have through the MSW program are so unique. And so putting together your story and making that case as to why you're best suited for this position based on all of your wonderful experience.
I'll add one other thing to, you can certainly, I'll offer, you can reach out to me at any time if you're interested. I'd be happy to put you in touch with folks who I know in the field. Certainly being a part of a strong, connected community like NYU social work is important, and you should leverage it. There's a lot of great opportunities out there for you.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to now move, and actually to Philip's point, for folks, I'm going to post soon in the chat for folks who are interested. If you have any questions afterwards that we aren't able to get to for our panelists, you can feel free to email our office at there we go, supporting in the chat from Laura Turner, supporting.silver@nyu.edu. And even if it's for just one specific panelist or for any of them, we can connect with them and ask them your question for them. But actually with that, we are going to move on to the question and answer, the audience Q&A section of our program for tonight. And so if you do have a question, if you could use the raise hand function at the bottom so that we can acknowledge you, and then you can come off mute. Or if you prefer, you can type your question into the chat and one of the moderators, so Sergio or I, can take a look and read it out loud on your behalf. But actually to get us started, one of the audience members, Tamana, had to leave early and had sent me their question in advance. So we're going to actually start with that question, and I can post it because I can copy and paste it into the chat too. This is for all of our panelists or anyone who feels who would like to answer it. They said, I'm curious if and how the conversation on white supremacy within our nonprofit and philanthropic systems, that's that word again, systems, is arising for you in your workplaces.
Yeah, so I can answer that. Working for a large company like Macy's, it is definitely in our DNA to address many of the social issues that are happening around the country and our communities. So we do have a diversity and inclusion team that really focus on everything that's going on and ensuring that we can address these issues in a meaningful way. So whether that's through grant making or various webinars we might hold for colleagues, or reaching out to colleagues in various areas. So there's it's not just on white supremacy, but I'm also thinking of what's going on with in Asian communities and kind of how our support around that, and looking at, how we can show up more and support various causes that are benefiting organizations and populations that are greatly affected by so much of what's happening around the country. So yeah, I think that it is, from a CSR standpoint, companies' responsibilities to address these issues.
I think for all of us as social workers also, as we've been talking about philanthropy and how we're raising funds, but the importance of how we give funds as well, whether we're giving back in a sense to Silver, or if there are organizations that we support their mission, or they support our communities or the groups that we identify with, that we also give to those organizations to show support in this time. And not to be so worried about how much it is, but to be consistent givers. So if you can only give $10, but you give $10 regularly, that means a lot for that organization in anchoring their mission and showing the support that they do have. And larger donors often look to see, well, who gives and who gives consistently. Does your the population you're serving, do they give back? Is it, if it's for the school, do your silver graduates give back to the school? So I think for all of us, especially in this time of racial reckoning, those groups that we identify with, that we support their mission, that we also give to those organizations so that they can grow.
Where it comes up for me is either government entities or foundations will often ask about the diversity of leadership, and including on the board, at the board level, and how reflective we are of the populations that we serve. And there, as part of the scoring process in terms of how well your application does, that is part of it. So while it's not necessarily a direct conversation, it is, and it has become more and more important representation, which is just the beginning of the conversation. I think, as we all know, that representation is just the beginning, but that's where it shows up most for me.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I think about philanthropy and working with wealthy individuals, you only need to trace those funds back a few generations before it starts to get really ugly. And so I do have concerns about my work in fundraising and how those impact each other. I mean, our school has, of course, its DEI mission statement, and the instructional program handles that. But as a leader, I really, you know, as someone on the senior leadership team, it's really important that my team also have its own DEI goals, and that I see myself as a white person, as someone who is leading the charge of changing things within our organization. And I think that in so many ways, a lot of the fundraising techniques that we have are not equitable, and they don't feel good to a lot of folks. And so I'm really interested in bringing in the creativity, motivated through, you know, social justice things that I learned at NYU, to think about how can we do things differently that create a more equitable community and that make folks feel more included.
Awesome, thank you so much for that. And we also have Temi, who typed a question in the chat. What does the day-to-day look like?
I think that's a great question. And unfortunately, the answer is there is no such thing as a day-to-day. Fundraising, the world of fundraising is so varied. I guess it really depends on how your organization fundraises. At GMHC, we have major donors where we have to do that research and really come up with a plan and think of a strategy. And then we have direct mail, where we do a mailing out to a lot of people and we kind of get $25, $100 gifts. And that too, we need to think about what program should we highlight in our mailers, whether it's digital or snail mail. And also kind of thinking about that strategy, right? You know, there's still a group of people who still like to use snail mail. And then there's events, which can be fun, and anything from like high ticket price galas to, for GMHC, we have the AIDS Walk, where it's kind of a different type of fundraising. By the way, AIDS Walk, May 16th. And then there's also, like I said, the cornerstone of good fundraising is good quality programs. And so I spend a lot of my time doing, you know, in programs, even as a CEO, because that is, again, kind of the foundation of good fundraising. And so, and that's actually the good side of philanthropy or fundraising or development work, is that it's exciting and it changes, and it's never dull.
From my end, it's I work a lot with organizations around the country. And so for me, it's really ensuring that our business priorities align with our grantees and the types of programs that we're supporting. So it's a lot of conversations about opportunities that where Macy's funding can be most impactful. You know, we really look to quantify the impact of every dollar that we spend. And so really kind of diving into programs and where funding is most needed. I don't oversee volunteering, but we work really closely with the volunteering team so we can incorporate volunteerism into a lot of our partnerships with grantees, and a lot of, figuring out the strategy in terms of what do we want to stand for? What story are we trying to tell? How can we share with our customers and our colleagues the impact that we're making in our communities? And so it's kind of a little bit of everything, that, that one-on-one conversations with nonprofits, but also the overarching strategy and figuring out how we're trying to share the story.
Okay, thank you so much. We're actually going to move on to our wrap up, but before we go to last thoughts, I'm going to put into the chat. This is a link for a feedback form. This is the first panel that we've done of this kind, and we are really looking forward to hearing some of the attendees, what your thoughts were, and if you have ideas for what we could do for future programming. And so we will also, I put it in the chat, but we're also going to be emailing that out in a follow-up email afterwards. So if you don't see it there, then we'll send it to your email later if you don't get a chance to it. We'd really appreciate your feedback afterwards. So thank you very much, and thank you to our panelists. So we wanted to give kind of a last couple of minutes for last thoughts from all the panelists. If anything that's come up in the panel or anything that you wanted to share with our community, with all the folks here that maybe we didn't get a chance to ask about or talk about in the discussion so far. So I think that perhaps we'll go in the reverse order of when we introduced, if that's all right. We can start with Pia in that case.
The key, I mean, you'll hear me say this in class and everywhere, is always to be authentic and be sincere. So if you are doing the fundraising for yourself and your own organization or for another organization, you have to believe in the mission of that organization. If you want to communicate that to potential donors, to clients, to everyone in between, to support the mission, and for that mission to be clear so that your events, your strategies around fundraising also anchor that mission in the population that's being served and what it is that you're doing. And definitely also to encourage all of you that if you want to start your own organization, because you'll find the gaps in service really jump out, especially at this time, in the political climate. There'll be gaps in service that sometimes our own values no longer align with where we're working. And so where you see that opportunity, you see those gaps and you're on the ground floor serving, I definitely encourage you to start your own organizations and nonprofit. If you have other individuals that you've been working with that support that, you get together, form your board of directors, organize who will be your fundraising person if it's not yourself, and really don't be afraid to do the work because you're already doing it.
Thank you. And then next would be Kelsey.
Sure. Did I mention that AIDS Walk is May 16th? So sometimes as fundraisers, we need to be persistent. What I would say, in addition to what Pia said, would be something that we didn't get to talk about that I think is very important in fundraising is networking skills. Developing networking skills. Philip and I, we connected years ago, and when we saw each other's name on this panel, we're like, oh my gosh, how fun. Maria, she was a former intern of mine. Hi, how great. My guess is Laura in a few days will shoot me an email and ask me for a donation, which I will have to say yes to. So this is like even this is fundraising. And I think somebody already requested to connect with me on LinkedIn. And so this is, I think, as social workers, I have my MSW and I have my MBA, and the MS social work school does so many things way better than the business school. The one thing that the business school does way better is to focus on networking and building networks. And so I want to bring that to social workers, and we ought to do that. We know that about kind of helping our clients, but in terms of our professional development and fundraising and anything else, that's something I would suggest.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And then next is Kelly.
So I think for me, the one thing I haven't shared is that there's been a handful of times throughout my career that I've definitely had imposter syndrome, where I see a lot of people nodding their heads, where I will, land a position and be like, do I know, obviously I deserve this, I've gone through the process, but can I do this? Because my career, as I've shared, hasn't been so linear. And it made a lot of sense to me. And what I can say is each time I felt that way, within, the first week of the job, it's like, I can do this. And I've continued to draw on all of my skills throughout my career. And, again, I just can't emphasize enough that there's so much that you can do with your degree. And just to, have the faith in yourself that you are, the fact that you're going to graduate with your MSW and the skills that you've learned from this program are so invaluable, and there's so much that you can do with it. So just, if you're in an interview at any point and you're having that imposter syndrome, you can think of me and just know that, there's, you can certainly, if you are in this interview and you land that role, then there's certainly able to do it and succeed and pull on all of your wonderful skills.
Definitely relatable. And yeah, Philip, there you go.
I'll keep it quick. You're in such a good place being students at NYU or being alums of NYU. Here's the thing, what I'll say very practically, fundraisers are very much in demand, and it's one of the higher paid professions, one of the higher paid roles in organizations. So it's worth checking out if you're interested in having a good impact in an organization and being well compensated. I have recruiters emailing me 2 or 3 times a week with jobs and opportunities. There's just not that many of us, and so you will be continually in demand.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for those last thoughts, those final takeaways.
Sergio, can I interrupt for something really important?
Of course.
I'm not going to say AIDWAC. The professor in me, the professor side of me can't help but to say, like, what a great job these 2 interns did, right? What an amazing job. So thank you.
Thank you. Sweet of you to say.
Thank you. Now you're gonna make me blush. But thank you so much. So before we wrap it up, I just wanna move on to a portion so that Laura Turner can talk about One Day. Let me just queue up.
Great. Like Kelsey, I am not above a shameless plug. I got your attention. And as you probably couldn't gather, I mentioned earlier, I'm not a social worker, but I am the biggest social work enthusiast. I really do believe you all can do everything. You are the most incredibly well-trained group of people. And I really believe in seeing you move into this role of philanthropy and fundraising. I think or CSR. So thank you for coming. I hope this opened up some opportunities or ideas for you, and do reach out to my office and we'll keep you in touch with anyone you want to get in touch with. I figure we talk about what, actually, before I forget, also Sonia, the Office of Career and Professional Development's on the call. Thank you so much for all you do to continue to help our students have these opportunities and for helping get the word out. So glad you're here. Fundraising in action, guess what? Starts tomorrow. NYU is having our Day of Giving. We're going to support the Moving Forward Fund, which is a really incredible fund we launched last year to help students with that final push right when they're getting ready to graduate. From regalia to licensing fees to exams. You all remember what that was like. If you're on the call, you think you're almost done and you get whopped with all these additional costs. And that's really that moment that helps you get from point A to B to becoming a social worker. So we'd love for you all, if you can't give, watch it, see how we do it, check out the messages we get, go to the social media. It's a really great example, like really the next day to kind of look at it with fresh eyes of what fundraising looks like, at least from Silver, from NYU. And that being said, I can't say enough good things about Chloe and Sergio. You're right, Kelsey. They were absolutely incredible. They worked really hard on this. I'm sure you can tell, and are incredibly professional, and examples once again of why I love social workers. So that's my little pitch, but I'll let them take it away. Thank you so much. And I'll put a link in the chat for NYU One Day.
All right, awesome. Well, with that being said, that wraps up the show. Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Pia. Thank you, Kelsey, for coming and sharing valuable information. Thank you, everybody, for coming and getting to hear these professionals speak about their journeys and give you some gems to walk away with. And thanks to my colleague Chloe and Laura M and Laura T for working for us working together to put this together and be able to provide something that we don't often see. So thank you so much, everybody. Please take care and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.